Greetings everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm your host, Hadron. This episode of the Top 10 we explore the deadliest battles in human history. These terrifying confrontations pitted human beings in the most unbelievable of situations imaginable. Crushed under the deadly machine of war and caught in a desperate struggle just to survive, it's hard to envision the horrors these poor souls witnessed. Now, let's jump into the maelstrom of war. Number 10. The Kaiserschlacht, or the Spring Offensive. After the collapse of Russia and the Eastern Front, the Kaiser and his generals saw their chance to finally free themselves from the bitter trench war waged on the Western Front for many years. The newly allied United States had joined forces with Great Britain and France, and soon their numbers could tip the scales against Germany. Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff saw their chance to break the back of the Allied front and turn the tide of war in Germany's favor, once and for all. Unsure as to how many or how quickly the Americans would arrive, they understood the window of opportunity to crush the Western Allies was fast approaching. Fought in a series of battles codenamed Michael, Georgette, Gneisenau, and Blucher York, the first of these attacks, Michael, was the main assault, directed towards the British in hopes of outflanking their lines. The other engagements were fought to draw away resources and distract from this primary assault. Hoping to break the Allied lines once and for all, the German High Command, exhausted from years of war, threw everything they had at the Allies. They hoped to force their enemy's hand and seek an armistice to end the war on favorable terms, at the very least. Making huge territorial gains by the standards of the First World War, they pressed their advantage to the limit. The land gained for the unbelievable death toll in this Pyrrhic victory set up the German army for the coming counteroffensive, and ultimately their defeat. Number 9. The Battle of the Dnieper River. In the aftermath of the Kursk battle, the German Wehrmacht was on the defensive, retreating in the face of a blistering assault by the Russian army. On the 26th of August 1943, the Soviets advanced across a 1,400-kilometer front with over 2.6 million personnel. The Dnieper River was a natural obstacle, and the Wehrmacht realized this, planning on holding the western bank. Made easier by the western shore being at a higher elevation, this put the Germans in a strong defensive position to fend off the assault. Faced with two options, waiting to find another weaker crossing, while also giving time for the Germans to dig in and fortify their position, or directly assaulting the crossing and robbing the Germans of their chance to entrench and dig in, while also causing huge casualties for the Russians, the Soviet High Command elected to attack. Stalin grew concerned that the more time the Germans had, the more they would ravage the countryside with a scorched earth policy. On the 22nd of September 1943, the Soviets were finally able to secure a beachhead on the western shore. Over the next several days, two more footholds were established. Overwhelmed by the Soviet offensive, the Germans once again failed to stabilize the eastern front and were forced to withdraw. This gave the Russians another victory on their campaign to retake their homeland at an incredible cost of lives. Number 8. The Brusilov Offensive. In April 1916, General Alexei Brusilov proposed a massive offensive to the Stavka, or the Russian High Command. The goal of this planned attack was to take the pressure off the Western Front and potentially defeat Austria-Hungary and drive them out of the war. The plan was bold and very ambitious. With Tsar Nicholas II's support, the offensive was given the go-ahead. With over 1.7 million men, far outnumbering the 1.1 million combined Austrian, German, and Ottoman troops, the assault began on the 4th of June 1916 with a breakthrough on the 7th, in the face of the retreating Fourth Army. This forced the German army to halt its attack at Verdun in France and begin transferring troops to the Eastern Front, as originally had been hoped. It helped greatly weaken the Austro-Hungarian army and forced them to become more dependent on the Germans, increasing the pressure on the Reich going forward. This battle was the high watermark of the Russian fortunes in the First World War, with good planning, excellent execution, and competent leadership. The cost in human lives, however, was dreadful. Number 7. The Great Retreat. Following the Gorlice-Tarnow breakthrough, the Russian army was forced to fall back. The Great Retreat of Russia was a costly strategic withdrawal by the Russian army as it headed east towards home. Poorly equipped and exhausted, the Russians suffered huge losses at the hands of the Central Powers that summer as they fell back to a more defensive position and the promised hope of safety. For several months, the grinding retreat cost a large number of prisoners and territory at the hands of the Central Powers. Oberost, or the Supreme Command of the East under General Hindenburg and Ludendorff, pressed their advantage against the Tsar and his army. Eventually, the army would reach a more defensible position and stop the carnage, but the cost on the Eastern Front greatly weakened the Russian Empire, causing the Tsar to take personal command of the army in the aftermath of the chaos. With the loss of Poland, Galicia, and Lithuania, the Germans had established for themselves a large buffer between Russia and the Central Powers going forwards. Number 6. The Siege of Baghdad. The only ancient battle to crack this list, the sheer numbers of dead for this period are staggering. Long before the machine gun or the airplane, the fall of Baghdad was one of the most terrible events in world history. For just 13 days, the Ilkhanate laid siege to one of the greatest cities in the world of that era. A seat of learning, science, faith, and philosophy, the Mongols circled the walls of the proud city, intent on seeing it reduced to ashes. The great capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, the symbolism and culture of the city was beyond compare in the Muslim world. Hulagu Khan, under the authority of his brother Monkey, had hoped to establish their hold over Mesopotamia as they continued their western expansion. The Muslim states in the region, the Caliphate included, were ordered to submit and pay tribute and homage to the Khan and his empire. Al-Mustasim, the Caliph, received word from Hulagu and the demand for his submission. The Grand Vizier, Ibn al-Akami, convinced the Caliph not to submit, that they would be able to stand against the Mongols at their doorstep. This horrible advice flew in the face of the facts. Much of the surrounding region had already been conquered, and the Caliphate did not have an army that could rival the Mongols. The belief that the Islamic world would rush to the Caliph's aid if he was attacked was wishful thinking at its worst. With the refusal of his demands, Hulagu marched to the great city, intent on setting an example to any who would dare resist the Mongols. With the fall of the city on the 10th of February 1258 and the subsequent sack, over 2 million civilians were massacred in the week of murder that followed. Al-Mustasim was killed, and the Abbasid Caliphate with him. Number 5. The 100 Days Offensive. The final battles of the First World War were some of the bloodiest ever fought. After the Kaiserschlacht, the Allies, with the aid of fresh American soldiers, began to press their advantage in a massive counterattack. From the 8th of August, 1918, until the armistice, on November the 11th, the Allied armies of Britain, France, Canada, Belgium, Italy, Portugal, and the United States, among many others, pressed back against the fading Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The previous spring offensive of Germany had weakened their position along the front, with the AEF, or American Expeditionary Force, which had recently joined the army, bolstering its numbers. The time to drive forwards was now at hand. A series of bloody battles with unbelievable casualties followed. Amiens, 2nd Somme, saw the drive of the army to the Hindenburg Line, and then beyond it. The German army now fell back, finally forced to relinquish its conquered territory from 1914 in the resulting onslaught. The bitter death toll brought a final end to the First World War and its murderous insanity. Number 4. Stalingrad. Alone, easily one of the deadliest single battles in human history, the Stalingrad battle, which lasted from the 23rd of August 1942 to the 2nd of February 1943, saw the most bitter fighting in the Second World War. Under Operation Blue, Adolf Hitler wanted to seize the Caucasus and cut Russia off from its precious supply of oil. Making unbelievable progress, the 6th Army of General Friedrich Paulus approached the city of Stalingrad, situated on the western bank of the Volga River. If the city could be taken and the control of the river established, the Soviet Union would be effectively crippled. Understanding this danger, the Soviet High Command, under the instructions of Stalin, whom the city was named for, waged a brutal, inch-for-inch, house-for-house battle of grinding attrition in the streets of the city. The Luftwaffe leveled the city before the assault, which ended up turning the debris and rubble-strewn streets into a defender's paradise. Gone were the wide-open battles and sweeping campaigns, instead replaced with wars fought over tennis courts and buildings within the city. The Soviets held the eastern landing zone and were able to ferry men and supplies into the city, while under constant attack from the Luftwaffe in the crossing. The Wehrmacht threw everything they had into the battle, desperate to take the city, as the Soviet defenders traded lives at an astounding rate. While the battle raged within the city, the Soviets prepared Operation Uranus, a pincer attack on the supply lines to the city far in the west. With this, the supplies to the Sixth Army were cut off, and the German defenders were left in the city, now surrounded on all sides. An attempt to relieve them was made, but ultimately, facing starvation, General Paulus surrendered to the Red Army on the 2nd of February, bringing the nightmare to a close. Stalingrad is widely accepted to be the turning point of the Second World War. Number 3. The Battles of Rzhev. During the German invasion of Russia, several battles between the Red Army and the Wehrmacht were fought between January 1942 and March 31, 1943. Collectively known as the Battles of Rzhev. Taking place around Rzhev, these brutal engagements saw the Soviet army experience casualties at an astounding rate. Attempting to push the Germans away from Moscow after their hugely successful opening invasion the year before, General Zhukov elected to attack the Germans along a large bulge or salient on their front. There were 5 subsequent brutal attempts by the Russians to dislodge the Germans from their now heavily fortified positions. These battles, fought around the same time as Stalingrad, helped pin down the German army, keeping it from sending aid in large quantities to the south to relieve the city. This static battle, which was waged for almost 14 months, was only ended by the defeat in Stalingrad, which forced the Germans to regroup from the salient to fortify their lines after the resulting defeat. This crucial battle ground away at the German army, holding it at bay for over a year, setting the stage for the coming offensives. Number 2. The Siege of Leningrad. After the huge successes of the Wehrmacht in the invasion of the Soviet Union, the city of Leningrad found itself cut off from the rest of Russia and surrounded by the German army. On the 8th of September 1941, the last road into the city was captured and severed by the Germans. This set the stage for one of the longest and most destructive sieges of all time. The civilian population were left to face starvation as the winter approached. The coming winter froze Lake Ladoga and created a corridor of which the Soviets could resupply the city. The route would subsequently be used to evacuate civilians. For over 2.5 years, the people of a modern city were devastated, frozen by winter and embraced by hunger and the shells by the German army, in one of the most horrific genocidal atrocities in human history. Extreme famine, lack of fresh water, disease cost millions of civilians to lose their lives in addition to the defenders who held the city. In 1942, the Soviets attempted to break the blockade and failed. In 1943, a small land corridor was opened, allowing greater resupply to the city. The siege, however, endured until January 27, 1944. For 872 days of a living hell, the people of Leningrad had withstood against all odds. Finally, the Soviet army was able to expel the Germans from around the city, opening it to full resupply and to the outside world. Number 1. Operation Barbarossa. On Sunday, the 22nd of 1941, the non-aggression pact between Germany and the Soviet Union was shattered by a massive invasion of the Wehrmacht. Under air cover from the Luftwaffe, the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, was unleashed on the shocked Russian population. 3.8 million men, with thousands of tanks and aircraft, shattered the Russian defenders. Those that stood their ground died, as did many who fled for safety in the subsequent assault. Hitler's dream of Lebensraum, or living space, would finally be realized. Quickly overrunning the Balkan countries, the German army dashed forth, making substantial gains day by day. Staggering losses of both dead and surrendering troops led the nations of the world to believe that the Soviet Union would fall within weeks, optimistically. However, the shocking attack did something that Germany and the world had not anticipated. It united the Russian people together in a bitter resolve to push the fascist invaders out of Mother Russia. A pitiless war had begun, one that would see the most horrendous crimes in human history unfold. Nearing Moscow, winter finally exerted its full measure upon the German invader, causing them to stop in the shadows of the Kremlin. This brought the stunning campaign to a close, and the Soviet counteroffensives finally began that winter, driving the Germans from the edge of the city. Nearly 6 million died in this campaign, which brought the Soviets into the war and saw the Third Reich reach its greatest extent. I hope you've enjoyed this Top 10 episode. See something that I missed? Please comment below. There are so many that could have been on this list. I may even do another follow-up to include them all. Please like and subscribe to help support the channel. Also, please follow me on Twitter @HadrianTV to be kept in the loop for my future videos. Thanks for watching.